live in a world where the amount of education, healthcare, and wealth you receive is not based on your talents or efforts, but determined by your geographical location at birth. Imagine two children born on the same day. One is born in a struggling rural village, while the other in a rich, wealthy city. Before they can even take their first steps, their economic systems have already decided who will likely have the easier path. This is known as structural inequality. It is when the systems you are born into shape your lives long before your actions do. When we look at history, we can understand that structural inequality is a man-made problem. Let's take a look at the Industrial Revolution. While it is categorized as the biggest triumph for humanity, it has also caused heavy divide. Automation in the Industrial Revolution increased productive efficiency and profit for land and business owners. However, for the working class, they were subject to low wages, low living standards, and harsh working conditions. The disparity between the rich and the poor grew as the rich got richer and the poor got poorer. Inequality deepened not by accident, but by design. When we look at today's society, we notice similar patterns. Less economically developed countries such as Chad, Uganda, Sudan, and Bangladesh possess an abundance of natural resources as well as large labor forces. Despite this potential, many of these economies struggle to achieve economic prosperity. One reason lies in the colonial exploitation that these countries faced, where in the past, their resources were extracted to serve foreign interests rather than domestic growth. However, in the post-colonial era, efforts have been made to address these issues, such as through international aid. For example, Africa alone has received $1.2 trillion in aid since the 1960s. Although this money was aimed at promoting infrastructure and boosting jobs, many of these countries remain stagnant, struggling to reduce poverty and achieve self-sustaining growth. So this raises a very important question. Why do these countries remain poor? It is because of structural inequality. The flawed systems that we have created allow the persistence of poverty, especially in developing nations. Economists such as John Kay argue that poverty persists in countries that lack strong institutions that can promote productivity. Which is why, without institutions that promote fairness, aid just becomes temporary relief. Another form of structural inequality is corruption. Corruption drains around $2.6 trillion annually, diverting funds that could be used to develop countries. Political corruption often persists in countries that lack strong institutions that can hold powerful individuals accountable for their actions, which is why it is time to not only invest in the productivity of countries, but to further invest for stronger, more transparent institutions. When we look at the world today, we notice deep inequality. This inequality can be illustrated using the champagne glass model of global wealth distribution. As you can see, the richest 20% of population own more than 80% of global income, represented by the red bowl. Meanwhile, the poorest 20% of the population own less than 2% of global income, represented by the thin stem. This illustration highlights the staggering concentration of wealth at the top. But to understand how we got here, we must look beyond individual billionaires themselves. American author Chuck Collins argues that we must be less concerned about billionaires themselves and more concerned about the systems that funnel so much wealth upwards towards them. Which is why it is up to us to make these changes. It is up to us to change these structural inequalities and call for progressive taxation, strong labor protection, as well as transparent governments. As people aren't necessarily born poor, they are born into flawed systems, and being poor is a consequence of that. The future we lead should be an equal one where your economic systems do not define your potential or your worth. Thank you.